Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
You know what? I'm going to change the question I was going to ask based on riffing off on what you had there. I had a thought this weekend, and it was reinforced again this morning when people asked the kids a bunch of questions, when Rail asked the kids a bunch of questions about what technologies they used, and they hadn't heard of podcasting and a bunch of other things. And there was some chatter on the back channel about podcasting and commute, actually. Podcasting seems like the perfect thing for the commute. It struck me that with TiVo and podcasting and better recommender systems, and we're getting better and better at programming our information consumption personally and efficiently. And so the question I want to throw on the floor, and this is not a well-formed thought, but it really has stuck with me the last few days, is are we killing serendipity? By being so efficient, are we polarizing ourselves by now I can listen to exactly, pick a political bias on a particular topic. All the bloggers, all the audio bloggers, all the podcasters, all the TV programs on my side, are we, and I just want to get some kind of feedback, and I already got some positive head nods from this audience. Thoughts about that, and I got, and do you see anything on the other side? Obviously, there's going to be some kind of pressure. It's almost as if we're making these webs of communications and affect separating ourselves more, and we're becoming more isolated. I was standing in the airport, and half the people in the airport were on a cell phone, or that picture showed everyone on a cell phone. I'm not sure that was a good thing, because I probably would have said something nice to the people around me, but they were all too busy. So it is a trade-off, and I want to get people's comments on that trade-off.
So let's see, a slightly different topic is one about privacy and security. So with all the stuff that we're willing to put publicly online, whether it's our relationships with other people or photos that say exactly where you were, when, and who was there, what do you think are some of the things that we should be designing for? What do you think are going to be some of the first abuses that are going to happen to these things? For instance, if you think phishing is bad now, what about when your personal connections are out there and ones that you don't hear from very often, and suddenly you do? Are they really them?
That was too quick.
Wait.
I didn't have time to think.
Sorry, go back. So it's one of privacy and security.
This is a hard job.
And I have to fail publicly in front of everybody.
I want you to succeed. We all want you to succeed. We all do.
So it's just really, there's not much of a conversation about how are we designing these systems to kind of prevent abuse of them. And for the ones that are out there today, what do you think are going to be some of the first, basically, abuses of how they're going to be used in ways that anything from getting you more spam mail to things that are potentially more personally targeted?
Thank you.
For a given population or segment of the population, and I think it's important to specify that, does the use of this mobile social software we're talking about multiply or erode the ability of that population to use social networks, trust, reciprocity, norms and values to facilitate cooperation, sometimes called social capital?
I wasn't going to do this, but I'm going to just surf again off of something that you said, because it kind of it strikes me. Just to geek out for a second, when I used to be an operating systems programmer many years ago, we used to, and we were dealing with multi-process task schedulers, which were really, doing multitasking. There were some simple rules of thumb in terms of how to prevent thrashing, and there was a ratio of how many instructions you needed to execute in user mode before you compared to the number of instructions you executed in kernel mode, or the whole system could get nothing done. And I feel up at the human level now that I've been there in this continuous partial attention thing, and I go back to another rule that I had when I was a developer, which was I needed about 4 hours of uninterrupted time in order to get any quality progress done, any creative work done, any serious, if I wanted to be not dangerous in the code that I was writing, in terms of bugginess, I had to have a certain level of concentration. And recently, in the product that I work on, we did a lot of work in the technology to do aging of unread marks and things like this to lower the statistical density of new information, signaling coming in. And I know that the software can help people be more productive. So I just wonder if we should do something radical in the software design to stop people from getting interrupted so often, to force people to have more uninterrupted time, because I think we're losing something in the quality of interactions with one another. And I just think as the tool designers, we ought to confront this and embrace it more aggressively, even at the risk of being provocative in the design of the software, just to help people cope with the amount of stuff that they're confronting.
Great. Let's do, since we've got a lot of stuff up there, let's scroll back to where we were, and let's go to you with this set, and then maybe we'll come back around and do another round. But if we scroll back, what I'd like is just sort of make some kind of motion so that I can see you if you have some comments that you want to make, or you want to point to something, you want to suggest another question or some information, whatever, around something. I'm going to try to point to people and call on people that I don't know for my question, and I don't know you. 1 to 2 minutes, and
I'll try to keep it shorter than that. I just think these are.
What if I pass this around so that it actually goes onto the tape?
Hello, everyone in Overflow Land. Okay, am I audible?
Oh, yeah.
Great. So I just think that most of these are remarkably negative questions that devalue the human side, particularly the control that the user will have with these technologies. Having built recommender systems, we come up against the serendipity question all the time, and we've learned that people are not happy if you give them exactly what everybody knows they want. People want different applications, but they want things that surprise them. They don't want to go into the supermarket and have you standing there at the front of the supermarket saying, here's your bread, here are your bananas, go check out. And they're very tolerant and, in fact, demanding of a certain degree of error to know that they're being stretched. And I think that most of these questions have that same inclination of saying, if people in the future are exactly the way we are today, they're going to be challenged by the technology that's being deployed. And of course they are, because we are. But that doesn't mean that people in the future are going to need 4 hours of uninterrupted time. They may find that if they don't have something interrupting them every 5 to 10 minutes, they lose productivity because they're out of their element of working. They may find other things that change. That, we were having this discussion, I don't remember when it was, this morning, over the whole question. Yeah, but over the whole question that comes up of, would, when somebody is growing up with the television and IM and everything else and succeeding at getting things done, are they activating different pathways that make them more effective in a multi-channel way?
do you want to pose that as a question that we...
Well, I don't know if you want to pose it as a question or not, but I guess my big observation here is that for most of these, it's not true with JJ's question, which I think is in a different space, but I think there's an underlying assumption that I'm not willing to accept yet, that if we simply put these things out there and let people drive them the way they choose to drive them, that some doom and gloom is going to occur.
There's a lot of Prozac, Ambien, and Zoloft being used these days, so maybe there is a need, but, whatever. And that's an interesting question. Go ahead.
I just posted a quote. Sorry.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you. On the back channel, actually, I just posted a quote that I got from Fabio Sergio's great piece on Always On People, and it's chance encounters, unfortunately, have become increasingly rare. In Japan's city, the whole social milieu appears structured towards mutual avoidance. For one thing, it's hard to find a human being who isn't frantically working his or her thumb over the keypad on a mobile communications device. Once I surreptitiously raised my digital camera and shot an entire seated row of 6 computers. arms extended, all diddling their cell phones simultaneously. So I just wanted to raise that as one of the things that we see. One of the things I thought was, I've got to move this down, this is too loud there. One of the things that I thought was interesting about what Genevieve was talking about, the picture that she posted of people in Korea. I was imagining, if I didn't know what mobile technology was, I was trying to figure out, what are these people looking at? Why are they standing in these lines, and what is happening on these things? Where their attention span fell, I think, was really interesting. The other thought that I have is that I think there's also a danger in, we're all kind of yearning for this slowness. So you're talking about, is there a loss of serendipity? I think as we become increasingly mobile, having, and I was ranting at someone about this last night, having your trip down the street be spammed to death by information you're going to be encountering as your environment becomes more tagged, and the fact you're never going to be able to be lost, I think, is a problem. On the other hand, I think that we all get increasingly nostalgic about something. And as whenever we have these discussions about slowness or ways to slow down, or should we build in, I think it's time to actually get beyond the nostalgia and come up with a different approach and come up with a different perspective on it that isn't just all about being in love with these tools and isn't all about tagging, but isn't also only about the slowness and this return to something else. I think that we are in a different spot, and I want to see us approach this differently, especially the group of people in this room, and maybe come up with a third, fourth, fifth way of dealing with some of these issues.
Do you want to propose a question that gets added to here that relates to...
How do we get beyond nostalgia? That's what I want to ask.
Oh, she's now displaying.
You told me I wasn't going to have to take notes when people responded, so I just want to point out.
And we're not flexible enough to go with the flow here with an experiment? Okay. All right. We're going to, can you scroll back a little?
Not in type at the same time.
Oh, no. Go ahead and type. Go ahead and type. Okay. Next thing is, given the questions up there, why don't, instead of going question by question, why don't you, if you have some thoughts on a question that you want to comment on, just indicate that you want to comment on something and say which question you're commenting on or which person you're reacting to, and we'll call on you. So, Ray.
Can I respond?
Absolutely.
I don't think, at least what I was trying to say is about nostalgia. What I'm trying to say is effectiveness. People are, the information environment that we're in, for better and worse, but I'll focus on better, is high volume. It's just a high volume environment. And it's a high volume of things, at least in my life, that are small, and a high volume of things that are big that I have to give some thought to, some thinking before I respond in a quality way. And there are some other tasks that are not interrupt-driven that require some quality thought that take some time. And all I'm trying to get at is that there are certain activities that we have, some creative, some heavily complex, that we need to respond to, that require uninterrupted thought. And the environment, whether it's our work environment or just life environment, is heavily interrupt-driven right now. And it's not that I long for a time when it wasn't that way, because I don't. I actually get a lot more done, and I have a much richer life right now because of the things I'm exposed to. But I am less effective in certain things because of the heavily interrupt-driven environment. And I was just positing what should the tools be doing to help us cope with this kind of an environment.
You have a comment here, Derek?
Yeah, so I love this idea. When I was writing my book, I literally had to disconnect my DSL modem, walk across my apartment, and put it in a closet. Because there was no other way that I would stop instant messaging, stop checking things on the web, stop my RSS reader, stop everything so that I could simply get in the headspace to make progress on a book, which is a very, very different mode of thinking. And I had this dream when I was doing that of, on my laptop, I can set where I am, right? So, and when I set where I am, it changes some network configurations and a bunch of different settings and different programs. Wouldn't it be great to be able to tell my laptop, now I need to write? So so it'll set IM to away, it'll set the email to check once an hour instead of once every 5 minutes, set all kinds of settings all over that correspond to that behavior. And then when I'm done, I can say, okay, I'm feeling social again, and it sets email to check once a minute, and it sets all these things are possible, we just haven't done it yet.
I would like to say that since 1985, I have not written a single book where I wasn't distracted by doing 3 or 4 things at once. I do want to say that there is growing research that continuous partial attention while you're driving is fatal. And the one recent study I read about showed that if you're talking to someone on the phone, whether or not it's a hands-on phone or not, that is more distracting than fiddling with your radio, because other tests show that it had to do with the amount of your mind that you were devoting to your attention. So I think it would be an interesting long-term study that I'm sure can't be done to see whether when today's 15-year-olds are 25 or 35, they're going to be able to drive along talking on their phones and not have more accidents.
Jonathan?
Yes, I'd like to continue on this, and in support of what Joe Constance said, I think that just as the scholarship originally consisted of memorization and rhetoric, and when writing came along, it became the ability to sit there and think hard and analyze individual texts. I think we're moving to the era where browsing and in particular synthesizing huge amounts of information is going to be the key scholarly skill. And although there will be some need for people to sit in rooms and analyze, it's going to be a much less significant part of the overall picture of scholarship. And on top of the fact that kids are growing up with these technologies, as Joe mentioned, I think that he's right, that we need to be not simply designing for ourselves, and perhaps be more optimistic about how these kids that we saw today are going to deal with these technologies.
Jonathan's going to pass that to Mitch while Randy makes a comment up here.
Yeah, I have a couple of comments. And these have to do with software design. I believe that systems, when they're designed, provide affordances, and those affordances determine the scope of possibility. And so you can design things that can and can't do things, or can't be reasonably made to do things. People will often try to make them do things anyway. I also have a lot of experience in online role-playing games. And you can easily, using standard behavior research, define games that will consume people, that will consume their lives. They're called role-playing games. You might have heard of them. They consumed my son. And I knew better. But the point I wanted to make is you can actually design a role-playing game to be more evil and get away with it. You can make it so you get more experience points the longer you're on. Simple design, absolutely effective at consuming and isolating people. I think it's evil. And so it's the kind of question I raise. So I'm not trying to shoot down the systems we have. I'm saying we get to make design decisions. We get to influence people's design decisions. And so I think it's important there. And I think I made both points. By the way, my kids are the first generation. They were raised from when they were small on Apple IIs and then networked computers. They had networked computers in their room and everything. Wish I never did it. They're less socialized than their peers, and they're more isolated. Now, the good news is they survive well on their own. But the assertion that, you just feed people more technology and you don't have to worry about it and they'll make good decisions. As a parent who should know better, I didn't make great decisions. It's not inherent.
Mitch?
I'm going to sort of think out loud, I'm sorry.
Just for 2 minutes, though.
All these different threads are completing sentences that I've been involved in recent days. Last week, I think it was, Fast Company had this article about this great new perk that executives were getting. They were getting sent off to learn how to balance their lives at Shishi resorts in Arizona. And I thought, we really worry too much. Just about everything. I mean, what are we really balancing here? Not that much more information than life 100 years ago. We have a tremendous luxury of ignoring a vast amount of raw, uninterpreted data, such as what will the weather do? Is there going to be enough crops this year for the entire community? We don't worry about any of that kind of stuff. And the day-to-day processes of making a living in our homes is actually much simpler than, say, trying to survive on a farm, even in the 1930s. Now, what I think when we're talking about, as Ray was saying, having 4 hours of uninterrupted time when we talk about designing, and whether it's 4 hours or 20 minutes or whatever the appropriate amount is, what we're talking about is being respectful of people. When we're in a conference like this and somebody's speaking, we don't interrupt them. We're being respectful. But we interrupt people all the time when we can't see, hear, touch, feel them slap us when we get too pushy. And a lot of what we're talking around with the concerns and the reaction to the concerns is the fact that we just worry an awful lot. And we manufacture, I think, much more friction in our own lives as a result of that worry than the tools that we're worried about. And to the degree that we're even much more friction than they remove, I should say. And we just, fill up our time with fretting. And I think it's,
but wait a second, I have a question for you.
It's a human thing to do. So that's my observation. And I guess my question, if I have to, put one out, is, are we really dealing with that much more information? And I think the answer is no.
So we're going to go to.
Can I ask you a question before you pass away? Right? But I think that, don't you think that there's a difference between how you personally deal with your own time and your own space and how you want to relate with these tools, and you as a person who's making these tools for potentially millions of people to use?
Well, I've made tools for millions of people to use, so.
But when you're saying you're.
Well, that's what I mean by respectful. When we think about design, if you're going to build a building or you're going to design an intersection in a community, you have to think, there's two modes of doing it. One is you think about your own glory and how people are going to look back on this building or that intersection and say, God, they were inspired when they designed that. Or you think about the people who are actually going to use it. And I think we do a lot of the former rather than the latter in information technology.
Okay, maybe I misunderstood you. You were saying that we worry too much. And
I think we just fill up all the spared up cycles available to us with worry. And I think that's a very human thing to do.
Okay.
Okay, other comments, Stephen?
So there's this little wire underneath the keyboard in the... Too loud? Okay. So how's this? There's this little wire underneath the keyboard in the power book that holds the airport card in. And the one in my son's iBook is broken because I had to take out the wireless card so many times when he's just so wrapped up in IMing or other online stuff. World of Warcraft, I could pull the account at least. And then finally after a day or so, it's just too much. He has to get it back in, and that thing's broken. And there's no. I don't think that he really has control over it when he has homework to do. It's got to be the IM. I don't think it improves his homework, though he insists it does. The question is, what Randy said was really scary, that you could design something to be a crack cocaine that's so addictive. And I think actually Warcraft approached that for my 15-year-old. And so the question is, the people making these systems, are they going to make it so we don't want to use it very much? I don't think so. I think they're going to want to make them so we use it as much as possible. And we haven't talked about how all these systems that we're talking about are going to be monetized. And my guess is that Google's kind of showing the way that pretty much anything that used to be not monetized will be monetized by ads, whether it's email or whatever. So I guess once there's an incentive to serve ads to us from all the social stuff, we're going to see a lot more of it. And the ads, are going to be much more present in our lives. So I don't know. I guess Mitch says don't worry, but I think that's a little worrisome.
Stephen, the person behind you.
too close. Hi, this is Betsy. And the thing that struck me, and I have been addicted to video games, so I completely empathize with everything that's been said here, but I was also the kid that my mom had to go grab the book out of my hand 9 million times to get me to come to dinner. So I have to add, I mean, in my own mind, I thought, well, you know, I envy these people who grew up with the computer in such a way they could be, you know, addicted, or the teens we saw this morning. But on the other hand, we also had these other things that were, you know, completely consuming us and took us away from the world, and, I mean, they were printed.
By the way, Stephen, I worry all the time. Okay.
Can you pass that to Lilia? Does someone up here want to say something while Lilia's getting the microphone?
Just Stephen Johnson's new book, Everything Bad is Good for You, is so directly on this topic, and it's so wonderful. About the argument, really briefly, in the first chapter about games, is that he has a little set piece in which he says, suppose video games came first and books were the new technology, and then he has a 3-page screed about how books are taking our children, making them sit in dark places. They're totally scripted. There's no imagination involved. There's no interactivity. They're just sitting there turning pages instead of this rich world. The argument of the book is in fact that popular culture, including games, are in fact being misunderstood. That they are increasing not only they're increasing the complexity in a good way and enabling our kids and the rest of us who guess play games to learn a different set of skills that are directly applicable to solving problems and understanding the real world. But it's a really, really good book.
Howard, did you want to say something before we pass it to Lilia?
Well, I just want to say that I had this argument with my daughter every night. She would do homework in front of her computer, and she had her word processor up, 5 or 6 IM conversations, talking on the telephone, and if I tried to turn the television off, she would get upset with me. And she said, Dad, I get straight A's. When I don't get straight A's, get back to me on that.
Lilia?
I was thinking about this question of, you know, designing technology that would let us to concentrate and be productive. And I just think of for example, news aggregator. Because at the first time, it was technology that helps you to be more productive. Like instead of going to all those weblogs and websites, you can have them all together and read them much faster. I mean, the problem is that once you get the tool, you subscribe to 100 more, 200 more, and then you still have this overload. So then, like for me, it's thinking maybe it's like something in the nature of how we are. Maybe we just greedy in terms of, you know, once we have something, then we want more. And then I wondered how far, if you put tools there, how far they would actually support things. And to connect that, I think that what we have to do is actually think how we can maybe rewire ourselves to make more conscious choices and to switch between different contexts. And just as an example of, you know, switching everything to write a book, for me, what works for me when I work on my PhD research, I just book a day of working at home, which has the same thing as at work, the same connectivity or email and stuff, blah, blah, blah. But somehow just a, you know, mental thing that I'm working on that actually helps to work on that. So maybe it's of thinking how we can learn to focus on things and to ignore all those extras.
I have a question for everyone, so just with a yay or a nay, we should continue with these questions, or we should generate a new set of questions from the panel and go with those. So we should continue with the set of questions up there, yay or nay? Yay? We should go with a new set of questions generated, yay? Yay. Well, that was really enthusiastic. So here we go with a new set of questions, and this time we'll start with Randy, and we'll go all the way around and back to David.
All right, I'll go a little more mundane this time. I'm very interested in some questions around tagging. There's a lot of talk about it this morning. But Dave, I actually framed this question a week or two ago, and Dave actually framed it during his talk in a different way. But I wanted to turn it to a question instead of a statement. So I'm going to use Flickr as an example. That's the photo site for tagging. I call it the most successful example of what I call group tagging, which is a shared context. So the events, people create things as groups and events, and then people tag it. So it's a wedding, people went to a wedding, all go in there, and it's like a collaborative album. It's like laying an album in front of you and everyone are saying, oh, that's Uncle Mary, Uncle John. But, so that's an interesting context. He also described the personal context, as we know, which I just like to look at pictures from this weekend here. And then there's this kind of, is there a global context? So my big question here is, are there other contexts that are like every context, which have some special attributes, which would be very useful? And it's not just the global one. Is there something between a very personal context and some others? And so the suggestions on my list were language, geographic areas, and any other things people can think out that aren't kind of covered by the kind of, the Flickr group is a small number of people in the tens or the hundreds. Some things turn the thousands or tens of thousands. And if you have any ideas for these contexts and any information about them, to some of the anthropologists and stuff, I'm very interested in already identified sub-contexts for tech.
Great. These questions don't have to relate to each other. JJ?
Sure. So actually, this question is about reputations and whether it is actually a needed goal at all to have combined reputations. Is reputations really in relation to the specific thing that you're doing, let's say like your eBay reputation, your seller reputation, and therefore the different kind of contexts you're in have a reputation that's very specific to it, or do you really think it's something that you really should be combining into one big kind of who you are as an identity?
Well,
hang on for a minute, Howard. Let's give Liz a moment to. Great. Howard?
What are the consequences of having different generations, and I mean generations around the world, who are living in different cognitive worlds because of their technology practices?
I'm going to take a different spin. I think it would be a reasonable generalization that most of the work or conversation that I've seen about social networks and formation and dynamics relate to the public internet, and all that implies. But the world that I've kind of spent most of my career in is not just involving technology and people and interacting with people, but with an overlay of organization on top of it, and all that implies. And I've watched as a number of as those who are learned have tried to do things like knowledge management and knowledge ontologies and reputation systems and things like that in terms of applying the stuff in the organization, and it's just failed over the years in my view. And there's all this exciting stuff going on the net. But within organizations, we have one of the richest ecosystems of dynamically forming groups and really interesting interactions between them. And there's real value in trying to improve those interactions because there's a tangible economic benefit. So I guess what I'm asking is, why hasn't there been more successful experimentation and outcomes from that experimentation within environments with these boundaries in them, and how can we figure out more of what works and what doesn't within those boundary-filled environments?
Unclear antecedent. Do you need? Do you need? Do you want to? So the way she's framed this, Ray, and you can say if you want to add to this, is why hasn't there been more successful experimentation and outcomes within these unclear antecedent boundaries?
Organization, team, department.
This is almost global versus smaller context question. When you get into smaller contexts, it gets confusing.
It's not really smaller context, because organization is totally different from a group of friends, because we have all the power and salary things related to that.
So let's start with that last question.
Oh, that's right.
I have feelings too, By the way, this is the difference between Liz and speech-to-text software. Is that Liz gets
This
to
is
ask.
phenomenal.
Unclear antecedents. We're
But
going to wait
here's the
till.
deal. Who was it that said that synthesizing, Jonathan just left the room, that synthesizing was going to be one of the most important skills you could have? How fast is she at doing that?
This is plus plus.
Right. There you go. David. We can't capture you in software.
I just want to make clear that the premise for this question is I think accountability is generally a really, really bad thing. It's one of those things, it's prima facie bad. That is, you have to have a reason to ask for accountability. It should not be the default. So with that as my premise, which I understand some people may disagree with, so it's a sort of two-part question. How can we design the minimum required accountability into the software? How do we discover where that point is? And how can we keep it separate from a question that impinges on it often, which is anonymity, keeping the maximum anonymity for both social and political reasons?
So, I guess what do I want to do? Let's start with the bottom one. Let's start with David. Let's go to David's and let's work our way up. But if we sort of start moving naturally into another question, I'll go with that too. Does anyone have a comment on if accountability is bad?
We do.
Yes.
Why is accountability bad?
Isn't that obvious? It applies in exceptional cases, and there's certainly places and times where you want it. There are roles that you want highly accountable, so this is not always bad, but it's prima facie bad. You need a reason in order to hold somebody accountable, and in so doing, you distort the situation, and you often do so by applying rules over judgment. That's the next thing that happens with accountability. So it often calcifies human interactions in a way that diminishes them. Now, look, there are obviously places where you want it, but to make it the minimal and default, as for example in trusted computing, I think is a really bad idea. I don't know if that helps, but I'm not sure I can.
Are there comments on this particular question? Go ahead. Where's the microphone? Can you pass it his way? Careful. Yeah, that's a very dangerous cord there. You caught it.
So the question is, whom are you accountable to? And effectively, we're all accountable to each other. That's the point. We value each other based on what we think of each other. And you're drawing a distinction, perhaps, between accountability to preset rules and over-replication of them, as opposed to accountable to the public opinion of you. Now, if you're not accountable for your behavior at all, then you do have a big failure case. You have the prisoner's dilemma case, where the rational thing to do is to betray people because you're not accountable for your actions. Whereas when you know that you may meet these people again, or they may tell other people about you, so you have some persistent identifier, which then you are more accountable for your actions. So the distinction is not necessarily between anonymity. You can have persistent pseudonymity, if you like, and that will work. But this sort of plays back to your question of, should you be able to connect all your different pseudonymities together, or should someone else be able to do that to you and hold you to account? And this can happen. It happened to Amazon. They had the book reviews up, and suddenly the real identities were revealed, and they realized that the authors and people who were, and their rivals were bickering with each other in their reviews back and forth the whole time. And had they actually signed the reviews in the first place, they wouldn't have done that. And the reviews, would the reviews be more interesting or less interesting? It is a tricky balancing act the whole time. But to say that accountability per se is bad, I think is a gross error. It's about. I've got a great Douglas Adams quote, which I read out on many occasions. But he says, let me get this up. People complain that there's a lot of rubbish online, or that it's dominated by Americans, or that you can't necessarily trust what you read on the web. Imagine trying to apply any of these criticisms to what you hear on the telephone. Of course you can't trust what people tell you on the web, any more than you can trust what people tell you on megaphones, postcards, or in restaurants. working out the social politics of who you can trust and why is quite literally what a very large part of our brains evolved to do. And I think that's a very pithy way of putting it, which is that these questions of trust are very deep and complex things, and trying to and perhaps your point is trying to encode these in rules is a bad idea, and that's where I agree with you about trusted computing. That is an attempt to evade the problem by saying this is really hard, but we'll let the computer decide, which is that's actually an abdication of responsibility. This is saying I don't trust people, so I want the computer to enforce rules that I will totally make up on the spur of the moment, as opposed to I will decide who I send this to see whether I trust them to pass it on or not.
JJ, do you want to make a comment on it?
Yeah, it was just more in the sense that I think there's ways of, in agreement with you, not algorithmically combining these things together. We already have physical resumes today that kind of gather together pieces of what we've done in the past as reputations into one thing that other people, when they read it, can come to an understanding of what they want to come to an understanding about you, of what your reputation is, about how much they want to talk to you or perhaps even trust you. Just in the context of, if reputations are very context specific, very specific about eBay, let's say, you should be held accountable there if you're going to sell things or buy things, that gathering them up together in one place, you can still let people make a decision about what they think about those different badges about you. That's all.
Can I have one sentence reply?
Yes, please.
Kevin, we're likely, after we go out and tonight, we're likely to agree in every particular about how we treat people and when. However, I will disagree with the use of the word of accountability, to have that imported into every human relationship, as if because it's a legal term that allows people to make demands of one another, which I think we would again agree is probably not how we think about or want to think about human relationships.
Jay Schwab, people want you to say something out loud. Where are you?
By popular demand.
Can you pass the microphone to Jay Schwab, please?
I can speak pretty loudly.
Not in the other room.
Actually, we have a mic here.
Oh, great. Okay.
In any case, I was just saying on the back channel that I think we're confusing accountability with identity. I think that in almost every case I can think of, accountability itself is a good thing. You just sometimes want to pair it with anonymity. There are cases in which, that's essentially my point. I can give examples if people need it.
Sure. Go ahead.
Pseudonymity is another way to put it. Sure.
Go ahead, and then I want it to come all the way back over here. Bring the mic back over this way.
Do I have to take it over there?
After you speak, yes.
Oh, good. Okay. So let me ask this question in a different way. This morning, when the kids were showing their web pages and the like, they were blacking things out or whiting things out. And they were very conscientious about this and made the point a number of times that they were protecting either their anonymity, their friend's anonymity. They didn't want us to know what their screen name for talking to their boyfriend was, things like that. Was that responsible or was it naive?
Well, interestingly, we could have all been, Googling their page and gone and looked it up. But I think the thing is that it was kind of one of those, maybe it is a bit naive, but it was still the thought that counts. It's still that show of respect for the people who are part of your very close social circle. And I don't know, I think that kind of counts for something.
Stephen?
I was just going to say, hi, I'm Steve from AOL. I was going to say that one of the things people do is they express these context-dependent dramatis personae, right? I am perfectly respectable on eBay, but when I go to another place, I am completely, I'm a troublemaker. And this is something I can't speak for the MSN people, but we've seen actually quite a bit, that we have people who go into soap opera forums and they're complete, trolls and flamers, and they're disruptive. And when they get banned, because of the way our banning works, you're basically banned from all the boards. So we get all these complaints that, I'm perfectly nice over here and I'm perfectly nice over there, and people just like to be able to go into this one place and cause trouble. So what I would propose as a reasonable solution is that you provide a way that people can have as many of these personalities as they like, which is what we do on AIM with the linked accounts, right? So I can have 20 accounts, but they're all me, and they're all, when I sign on to one client, I get on all at once, and that my eBay people never know that I'm this person over here. So I have full accountability over here, and then I have the ability to choose how much I want to invest in each one of these personalities. This one's a troublemaker, this one's trustworthy. And I really think that if we just give people that amount of control over what they do with each of these online personalities, these expressions, then all of a sudden we have the ability to add real accountability. But when we get into a situation like trusted computing, where it's the only option, it's the only thing you're allowed to do, now all of a sudden we get into the much more less palatable situation that David was talking about.
Do you want to pass the microphone to Genevieve? Thanks.
All right, I have to have a classic anthropological intervention here and say to you, when you keep saying people and we, who is it that you're referring to exactly? I think it's really clear, listening to this conversation about accountability, about identity politic, that it's coming out of a very particular notion of how identities get crafted, that for better or worse happen to be, at least for the way the conversation has gone on for the last 20 minutes, grounded in a very particular set of American, perhaps even Western sensibilities. In Korea, for instance, when online chat rooms first came along, the last thing you ever wanted to be in a chat room was anonymous. Because if you were anonymous, the chances were that, in fact, you were having a set of social interactions with people who, A, you might want something from later, so you wanted them to know who you were so that your behavior towards them, in fact, counted to your social network. So, in fact, being anonymous was the last thing you wanted to be. Even choice is constituted in the way that it's being used in this room, again, is a really American notion. And I think you've got to be thinking about the fact that accountability is going to look completely different in somewhere like China, where people are used to all of their correspondence as being surveilled by the nation state, and where that is an acceptable set of politics, where the same thing is possible in India but not enacted, where you have notions of identity politic in Korea, where reputation and network are so incredibly important that you would never choose to be anonymous. In fact, you would exploit your identity constantly as, in fact, a social constant and have it in all your different places. So there's a whole lot of other things that I just want to have this little moment of saying it's all very well and good to have this entire conversation, which is fascinating, but there's going to be a whole set of other ways that these get contextualized in other cultures, in other parts of the world, not just by reference to class and race and gender, all of which are also going to be profoundly important. But, this conversation would look very different if it was happening with a bunch of researchers, even that worked in the UK, Europe, China, Korea.
Genevieve, quick question. No. Scanning the room, in your professional opinion, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being very diverse, 1 being not so diverse, how diverse is the group of people in this room?
Oh, I love being put on the spot like that.
Diverse
well, it's certainly more diverse than Intel is in terms of gender, so 10 points on that one. In terms of other ways of thinking about diversity, I'm prepared to imagine that most everyone in the room is probably over the age of 25 and under the age of 70. So,
culturally, though?
Oh, profoundly not.
Right. But thank you for your comment.
But I think, given that we also work for corporations or in parts of industry that are setting the terms by which much of the rest of the world is negotiating, it behooves us to at least attend to those things. Or, in fact, we're engaging in, what my good Marxist friends would say was a kind of form of neo-imperialism. And we're just using technology to do it.
That's right. Moving on to one of the other questions, and I'll let the next person I call on decide which one of the other questions that hasn't yet been discussed Randy's, Howard's, or Ray's they want to comment on. Does someone have something that they sort of scribbled down for one of the other questions that they want to comment on? Yes, Bob.
Just wanted to
do you want to pass the mic? Yeah, if you hold that little thing, it doesn't make bad noise.
So the obvious assumption behind Ray's question is that social technologies have not been successful or experimented with within organizational context. And yet, when I look at the ones that have been successful, they all come from organizations. And it's only kind of the hula hoops of social technologies that kind of have this one-year life cycle and then kind of die are the ones that are not being perhaps used a lot in organizations. So kind of email, talk in Unix long ago. So kind of all of the basic technologies seem like they primarily came out of organizational context and are used an awful lot, as you know, in kind of distributed work groups as well as people who are co-located but are still using technologies for distributed work groups to deal with lots of other kind of being out of town and lots of other things.
Nancy, behind you?
Yeah, I'll add on to that. It seems to me the question about the question that Ray raised about collaboration in organizations. I think it's beyond collaboration. I think you're talking about knowledge management and learning and the ability to really utilize the brains and the hearts and the souls of people. Souls might be the wrong word. I take it on that. I'm an idealist. Forgive me. Isn't just about the technology. It's about the culture of the organizations we build. And I think we're not looking often enough at the culture of the organization and its implication in our successes or failures, and more often are trying to pin it on a set of technologies that, in some nurturing culture to that sort of approach, they might be far more successful. So the question is, how do we look at the culture along with the things we want to accomplish, along with the technologies and processes to use those technologies? And I think we have to expand the scope of our questioning to the leadership, for example, of organizations.
Thanks. Is there anyone else? Ray, do you want to jump in with something else before?
I guess I'll just comment very specifically on that. I don't believe that either email or talk originated in organizations. As a matter of fact, I know they didn't. And I'll posit, maybe overstating it, that the technologies that have been broadly successful, I believe, are largely decentralized technologies. That when we think about it from a centralized viewpoint, and I will go back and say knowledge management has failed in its the conceptualization that it was being tested at least when I was at IBM. Centralized things that do require more culture, an understanding of business process, things like that, have not really gained broad success, and things that are more decentralized, have, and much to the consternation of powers that be. And I guess I'm going to come back to there is huge value to be had because of the number of social interactions that happen within organizations. What I would refer to as business practice that sits next to the business process, the more dynamic, processes. And organizations don't feel to me like the petri dish that the internet is, and I wish we could figure out a way to get more, testing and experimentation going on out there to see what works and what doesn't.
More comments on that? Yeah. Bill, go ahead.
I hate to be sort of tagaholic, but I've been watching Cam for.
What we know about you.
Yeah.
You do.
I mean, I'm not that way about. I'm a blogaholic, but I don't think the blogs are going to sweep through corporate America or corporate world all that quickly. Whereas I think tags do have a shot at it, in part because within a confined domain like an organization, a corporation, you get over many of the scaling problems. It's much easier for social conventions to emerge, like let's all refer to places as California.la or whatever, USA, California.USA. And they have immediate value, the sort of immediate value that in fact KM was proposing. So I think there's a chance that tags may catch on in some ways faster within organizations than they will across the global infrastructure.
Other comments on this? One of the things that I've noticed is that I may have left the previous question prematurely because a lot of back channel conversation is still on the previous questions, which has been really interesting feedback for me. So do we want to go back to reputation for a minute? And is there anything from the IRC conversation that someone wants to actually say out loud for people who haven't? Pardon?
It's on the screen. So.
Not everyone can see it. Not everyone can see it. Do you want to expound on any of it? No. Okay. Any more on Ray's question before I move on? Okay. Anyone have comments on either Howard's or Randy's questions? Are we ready for the next round? Last round? Yay or nay? Yay. Are we done with this format and you want a longer break before we get on the bus? Yay or nay? So raise your hand on that one. Do you want to call this the end versus do another round? Either thing is fine. It's very close to 6. So you want to call this the end and wrap it up now? Do you want to go one more round?
Let's hear the question.
Let's. Okay. All right, we're going to do half of it. I'll make an executive decision. Okay, last round of questions, and then we'll leave after the last round of questions. We're done. Okay, starting with JJ.
Oh, my Lord. Can I pass? I got to pick a new one here.
Okay, starting with Howard. We'll go back around that way.
Are we assuming that the rate of change is sustainable?
Wow. Wow. Okay, Ray.
I'll just comment that we've been just in the last few months doing some analysis of data related to work group formation that happened in some of our more high-stress collaborative situations out with humanitarian groups in Iraq. And anybody who has done temporal studies of work group formation and destruction, who gets re-invited to the next interactions and who gets left behind and patterns in that, I'd be really interested in talking to.
How much damage are we going to do? I'm sorry, it's another negative question. How much damage are we going to do to ourselves by giving in to the software's demand for making meaning explicit?
Hang on for just a second. Okay.
I'm going to ask another tagging question. Mark Davis at UC Berkeley Sims Lab suggests that archetypal images could be used in search refinement, specifically for tag search, in an attempt to remove language as a barrier for search, specifically. So you type in Viper in your local language, and you get presented some images from the different tag clusters for Viper, like the automobile model, a snake, etc. And clicking on the image would then narrow the search. So what are the benefits and the challenges to this approach? It's intriguing.
Hang on a minute, JJ. Sure.
So my question is, so where do you think the explicit listing of your personal relationships you have, where do you think they belong and where do you think they shouldn't be? Where do you think that they enhance what the relationship's supposed to be about, and where do you think it undermines it?
And after Liz gets that down, do you want to say it again?
Sure. What part?
Where do you think the explicit listing of your personal
the boundaries part. Where do you, when you list them publicly, where do you think it enhances what the relationship is supposed to be representing, and when do you think it undermines what the relationship is supposed to be representing?
So on that note, we hope we've given you some things to talk about tonight. And Liz Lawley, big hand. She wasn't only totally on top of the conversation that was on stage, she was totally on top of the conversation that was backstage, which goes to say some people do have never-ending, bottomless amounts of bandwidth. She scared me last year with that, actually. Thank you to my panel for being willing to indulge an interesting, funny, silly idea, and thank you to all of you for being a great panel.